Francis Chan said this, I think, in his Letters to the Church book that I loved. And it was one of the reasons he stepped away from his megachurch. He realized that the way that thing was designed was that the more he practiced and excelled in his giftings, the less other people needed to step up and grow in their giftings, because it could all be around his teaching every Sunday morning. And so you think about on a Sunday morning, how many people are actually using their spiritual gifts, and how many are actually speaking the truth in love and having to step into that. It's really very few. It's me in our church, or whoever the preacher is. It's the worship folk, some hospitality folk maybe, but really from a speaking the truth in love ceremony, it's very few. So then if we're all called to be doing that, then on Sunday morning, if that's all your church experience is on Sunday morning, you will never develop those muscles of how to do that, because you've never had to do it. You've never had to speak truth in love to somebody. You just listen to truth in love. Right. And so you become very underdeveloped. And I think that's a great way to describe as a church world, that we have a lot of underdeveloped Christians that have no clue how to speak to one another in love and truth.
Shelton, welcome back to the podcast. You've been on so many times. Of course, you and I get to hang out all the time, week in and week out. Every now and then we get to jump into the studio like this and talk about some of what the Lord has been teaching us. He teaches us through real life on-the-job training as we seek to live for Him and share Him with others. And of course, He teaches us as we study the Scriptures. And so my hope is that today we can have a conversation that helps communicate some of what we've been learning together over the last few years around church and discipleship and how these things work together.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited about it. I'm always love hanging out with the Into the Harvest folk and to think about discipleship together, and particularly, and you and I were just talking about this relationship of, hey, discipleship is not something separate from the church. Those two things go hand in hand. Of you are not being the church if you're not focused on discipleship, and you can't be a disciple without loving the church and being a part of the church. Like, those two things go together. And so, but I don't think in our present church culture, or at least in the last I think there's been a big movement more and more towards discipleship within churches. But I think in the first part of my ministry, first 20 years, it felt very separate. It felt very foreign. It felt like church was up to something. So you had these discipleship focused ministries that were very focused on that outside of the church. It just felt very separated. So I'm very excited to talk about it with you, and even more about building it together and saying, how do we do this as the church in a very meaningful way? So hopefully there's something helpful here. For anybody else listening.
Yeah. And for those who are joining us, what we're going to talk about today specifically is becoming a three-dimensional church. So we want to be the church that Christ always intended, both in a fullness of expression, but also in a fullness of function. And we're going to talk about that, how discipleship interplays with it. For those who may not have listened to Shelton and I talk before, maybe this is the first time you've come across Into the Harvest. Briefly, we can quickly introduce ourselves. You are the lead pastor at Paseo del Rey Church here in Chula Vista, California. I am the director of discipleship for Paseo del Rey, as well as project lead here at Into the Harvest. But we're really coming at this together. And so what you were just saying about church and discipleship and having those things really working hand in hand and in sync is what we're going to talk about today, but it's also what we are working towards in our church life here locally. Yeah.
And it's a work in progress. So you first mentioned this idea of 3D church a couple years ago, and you were still just kind of working on the language of it. And I think it's just a very helpful way to think about church. And so I'm excited to move and talk more openly about it here as we've kind of have put more flesh onto the skeleton of that. And so I'm excited about that. To get us started, I think it's important that we talk about what the church is called to do. I've really been, as a pastor, really been convicted around this. The church is not called to just collect people. We're not called to just gather people and grow as large as you can. If that is your focus on, hey, we're just called to collect people, then it'll affect everything you do. All of your events are just about getting people in. What you're doing on Sunday morning is just about keeping people, getting people there. But that's not our calling. Our calling is to go make disciples, to go transform people. And that is our calling, not just, and when we're saying the church, we don't mean church staff. We don't just mean church elders. We mean the body. Everyone is called to this calling to transform people into Christ-likeness, into little Christs, and to be that together. So we were, as a way of intro, we're going to take a look at Ephesians 4 and see this in text. You want to read that for us? Ephesians 4, is it 11 through 13 or beyond?
We're going to start with verse 11, and we'll read a little bit beyond verse 13. Let me go ahead and read these for us. It says, "So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work."
As each part does its work. There's so much there. We could
There
spend the
is.
whole episode right here.
This is the intro to this conversation,
Yeah.
but this could be a whole conversation.
Yes,
so
it is.
Let's maybe glean some of
Yeah.
the tops of the waves here from this passage.
Well, first of all, look at the role that the gifts these of apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Look at what they're called to do. Not called to entertain people. Not even called to minister to people. They're called to equip people for acts of service. And it's not to say we should be ministering, but let's define what that is. And so this dichotomy of congregation and ministers is not biblical whatsoever. The idea here is that we're all ministers. Some are called to be equippers, and those are that is our role, but we're all called to the ministry. And he says that multiple times as we all speak the truth together in love, and as we all do our part, as the saints do the works of ministry, then we mature. And this is God's vision for the church. And I think if we just pause and say, hey, if this is the biblical vision of what church is called to be, how close is that to reality of how we're experiencing most modern churches? Is that, or has it become so stage driven and separate where the congregation has become consumer and has not been participant in the mission of? And it's just a very different way to approach church. What are some things for you that?
Right. Well, by the way, we live right down the road from a hospital, so that's someone coming into our neighborhood
Yes,
there. Yeah. So there's a few thoughts here. First of all, like I said, if there's a word that I want folks to hang on to, it's this word fullness, that we want to live out the fullness of what it means to be the church. And that is both in terms of our mission, in terms of the way we express, the way that we live out our faith together as the body of Christ, and also the way we function. So what we're actually doing. So I think you see that, and that's part of what you're touching on here, is that if we don't understand why the church exists or what the Lord is doing through the church and in the church, then we can come away with much reduced versions of church, which is what I think a lot of us have experienced, and it's a lot of what we see in the world around us. And so the becoming a three-dimension church tries to address that. It basically says that, hey, we're doing some things really well as the church. but it's incomplete. We want to be the fullness of what God is calling us to. And so, like you said, that's touched on in several places here when he talks about growing into the fullness of Christ in verse 13 here, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. This idea of fullness and maturity, transformation, like you said, is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, I love it. And so how do we do that together? And there's so many things in here, but what I would point out is that Paul is writing this letter to a local body in Ephesus that he knows and loves quite well. Earlier in the book, he's already told them that they are the new temple. They are within the body, the Spirit of God dwells, and that they have the Spirit there. So this is not just a gathering of people. This is a spiritual body. And then he gives these ingredients. We will all grow up, he says, when we speak the truth of Scripture to each other in love. And as each part in this loving community is learning to speak truth, we will grow up. And what a easy, beautiful picture of disciple making. Yeah. And so I think that's what we want to talk about, is how do we demystify or make disciple making less scary? Because I think what I hear from a lot of people, whenever we start to cast this vision of, hey, you're called to make disciples, immediately people say, I can't do that. Who am I to do that? Well, are you a part of the community? Do you have the Spirit of God in you? Do you love other people in the community? And do you know truth of Scripture? Like, these are the ingredients here. Can we learn best practices on how to do that? Get better? Sure. But you don't have to have some massive degree. You don't have to be a preacher from the stage to be able to do this. Like, this is everyday people. As each part does its work, we begin to grow into him who is the head, into Christ's likeness. And so that is what the 3D church model is all about, of how do we help each person enter into these relationships where everybody sees that this is what we're doing. We're helping each other be disciples and helping people that don't know Christ become disciples and join into this process of becoming more and more like Jesus. And so, as we enter in here, we keep using this language of discipleship and 3D church. So let's spend some time to define, because you have some very simple definitions of discipleship and disciple making that I really, really like. I've adopted them and I think they're fantastic. So why don't we start first with how do you define discipleship? What is your definition?
So I have a very simple definition of discipleship, which is living a life of devotion to Jesus. So it's the lifestyle of a follower of Jesus. Discipleship is just a code word or a shortened way of capturing that idea that I'm living this life of devotion to Jesus. And so that is discipleship. Disciple making is when I pass on that way of life to someone else. And so if you are someone who is seeking to follow Jesus, then you're growing in discipleship. You're growing in a lifestyle of devotion to Jesus. And that's what's constantly under threat. And it's the same since the very beginning when Paul wrote to the believers in Corinth. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, he told them that he was fearful that their minds might be led astray, that just as the serpent deceived Eve in the garden, that their minds might be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. So if you think about Paul, like what kept him up at night? What was he concerned about for the Corinthians? His concern was that their minds would be led astray from having a simple, pure devotion to Jesus. And so that's what we're pursuing. We're pursuing a lifestyle of simple, pure devotion. And when we pass that way of life on to someone else, we are engaged in disciple making.
I think it's worth saying that I don't know if the church has been aiming at devotion to Christ as what we define a Christian as.
Right.
I think there's probably been more as just believers. Like, do you believe and do you want to go to heaven? Do you want to receive this free gift? And so we've parsed out parts of the gospel that are beautiful and wonderful, and we've only shared that as though that was Christ's aim, instead of the whole gospel to say, hey, God isn't just after believers, he's after devotees, which is just a very different thing. The demons believe, they're just not devoted to. Yeah. And so the work of the believer is to believe in Christ. Like, a follower must believe in Christ, obviously, but they're also following him, right? And so this devotion, and I like this that's a whole life word. It's not and so a disciple isn't just an attender on Sunday who's learning and just trying to get, quote unquote, fed and trying to have a happy, joyful life and going about their business. This is whole life. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a disciple. I'm a devotee of Jesus everywhere I go, no matter where I am. And so I'm trying to live out the ways of Jesus in every sphere of my life all the time. So just that everywhere all the time. And so then church, if church is aiming for that, and if followers understand this is the goal, it changes the entire dynamic and relationship of the church, where now I'm coming to church because I want to learn more about this. How do I follow this life? I want to become better equipped. I'm becoming and being a disciple. And then if I also hear that, hey, I've got a calling to help others become as a part of this, I need to participate in there. So
Into the Harvest is a nonprofit ministry made possible by generous partners who believe Jesus is alive today and still calling people to follow him. Their monthly support helps disciple making grow and thrive around the world. If Into the Harvest has made an impact in your life and you want to help share the good news of Jesus with others, join us today and become a monthly giving partner. Visit Into the
Yeah, we sometimes talk about true biblical faith means that I believe in, I belong to, and I'm becoming like Jesus. So it's all centered on him. And like we saw in Ephesians, the ultimate goal is that we become more and more like him. We're growing more and more into maturity, into the likeness of Christ. And that's happening both on an individual level. My life needs to become more and more reflective of Jesus in his image, but our life together as a church, which is really the context of Ephesians 4, yes, together as a group of believers, we are looking more like Jesus and we're functioning more like Jesus. And that's really where we're going to get to it. Where structuring and living out our life as a church together makes a big difference, because there are aspects of living out our faith as followers of Christ that won't happen on Sunday. And so we'll talk about the three dimensions of church in just a moment, but I do want to read these verses out of 2 Timothy chapter 3. It really touches on something that you were just saying. Here, Paul is writing his final letter, as far as we know, to Timothy. Paul is at the end of his life. He has discipled and mentored Timothy over the years, and he's reflecting back on that in chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. Paul says to Timothy that you, however, know all about my teaching, my way of life, my purpose, faith, patience, love, endurance, persecutions, and sufferings. And so if you think about what did Timothy, what kind of things did Paul pass on to Timothy? We're talking about discipleship and disciple making. And it was much more than just teaching, which is sometimes what we think of. Like when you talked about church, it can just be that we want more people. We want more people in the building. That can become a goal of church. Or it could even be education, that we want people to believe and agree to certain truths about Christ. Both those things are not bad. They're actually good. I would love to see more people belong to the faith and more people understand the truth. Yeah. But that really is just the first thing that Paul talks about. He says that Timothy learned Paul's teaching, but then he also learned his way of life, his purpose in life, his faith, his patience. There's 9 things there.
I love that. 9 things. Way of life.
Yeah, that patience, Paul was passing on to Timothy. And so, yeah, it's all day, every day. It's all of life. That's what we're trying to grow into, and that's what we're trying to pass on.
And I think this is huge, because what is the business of the church? Is the business of the church to feed the poor? Is it to clothe the home in the naked and here's I don't mean this controversially. I think the business of the church is to make disciples who are devoted to Jesus, but out of devotion to Jesus, we do those things because they're not, this isn't separated. A life devoted to Jesus will live life like Jesus, will practice that type of lifestyle. And Jesus very clearly talks about feeding the hungry and housing the homeless and taking care of that. So there's not this dichotomy that sometimes I think we see within, at least in our circles of like when people begin talking about, hey, what's the purpose of the church? Hey, the purpose of the church is to help more people to become like Jesus. And as that happens, we ought to be seeing more people fed, more people clothed, more people, because you have more people that are just living out that generous life of Jesus here on earth throughout their whole spectrum. That is just who they are. And so then our business then is, how do we help people grow into this Christ likeness? And everything we do as a church needs to be formed around that business of hey, this is part of helping people grow into that. And what are we doing? And so you came and you first presented this idea to be talking about it like this, and I love it. You said, hey, let's think about it in 3 dimensions. So let's break down what those 3 dimensions are.
Yeah, I actually brought a prop here, so I haven't done this before, but and it may not work great on this, but we'll test it out. So when we think about church, most of us are thinking about church in a 2D way, and so it's almost as if you're looking at a funnel from the top-down perspective, and what you see is just the circle. And what I would say this represents is that this represents what we'll call the Sunday gathering, or what happens on Sunday. Most people, when they think of church and they imagine it in their minds, it's limited to that. And so Sunday gathering tends to be built around a service, singing, and a sermon. And those are all part of our life as a church. We do gather on Sundays, and that goes back all the way to the first Christians. But if we were to rotate this and look at it, we would see that there's actually a lot more to this object, this thing. This is representing church. And so if we think about this in 3/3, that's really what we're talking about in 3 dimensions. They're all part of our life together as a church. And that first largest dimension of church is the Sunday gathering. But then if we imagined the middle part of this funnel as small groups, growth groups, house church, ways of gathering in smaller numbers, that's also a dimension of church that we need to express and function the way God has called us to. And then at the very bottom of the funnel, we would have one-to-one discipling happening, where older believers in the faith, men and women, are pairing up with 1 or 2 or 3 younger believers and passing on the faith, similar to what Paul was describing here in 2 Timothy. And so the 3 dimensions of church, these aren't the church and then these other things that we're adding on. This is all part of our life together as the church. So what would you add to that? Or how would you take it further?
Just here's the truth. To quote Paul, here is a worthwhile saying. That is that formation happens in community. That's the way God designed it.
Yes.
We are formed in community. There's no other way to be formed.
Right.
Like this is how God has created it to be. And so what we read there in Ephesians is that it happens in community. What's interesting in the first church is when you read Acts and in the first, just in how history has developed, community, people were just living life much more connected to each other. And so they were regularly breaking bread in each other's houses. I don't think they had to organize and think about small groups and one-on-one. I think they just lived community together. So the idea of what they needed to organize of hey, let's all get together as one bigger community on what they chose to be Sundays, on resurrection days. And so that became their rhythm. Over time, though, and over the last couple thousand years, and particularly here in the Western world where we have become way spread out and we've become very busy, and community has really kind of gone by the wayside. These are things that we now have to do with intention. And it's almost like it's flipped, where the easy thing to do is gather on Sundays. We don't have to give that much effort. That's just what we do. The other things, what they used to just take for granted, we're going to get together and eat, and we're going to be a community. We in our business have to do this with great intention and great purpose and great effort. You have to organize it. You have to think about it. You have to create it. But it's all worthwhile and good to say, hey, all three of these levels are needed in order for a person to holistically be transformed, because there are things that on one-on-one that will be missed unless you're in the larger community of celebration and worship that you got to have on that biggest level. There are other things that you have questions about that you can't ask on a when there's several hundred people in a Sunday service. But you can if there's 12, 18 folks around a dinner table in a house. Now I can ask them things, and I can get to know some people. I can minister to other people's needs. But I'm probably still not going to open up fullest and let everybody into every nook and cranny of who I am in a community of 12 to 18. But one-to-one I can. Now if it's me and you, I can really open up. Here are my fears. Here are my hurts. Here are my needs. And so you think about every level has its thing that it's serving that the other levels cannot. But if you only focus on one of those levels to the ignoring of the other two, you're going to become a one-dimensional believer. Just something you're going to be missing out on things. So I like this way of approaching it, of holistically, of saying I need all of this to be formed by the community, by the Spirit of God.
Yeah, and each dimension, each of those three dimensions of church, like you said, it has its own, by the way it's structured itself, there's a forcing mechanism there. I'm going to benefit in certain ways as part of the corporate Sunday gathering. And we'll talk a little bit about the strengths of each of these dimensions. But there are things that are going to happen in that smaller 12 to 20 people, second dimension of growth groups that are just not going to happen at the Sunday level. And they're going to happen at the growth group level, because the structure itself is a forcing mechanism for those things happening. And then, of course, with the one-to-one, the same idea. But the thing that is the same across all three dimensions, first, is the goal. So we're going back to this idea that our goal is to mature in Christ. It's formation, it's transformation, it's becoming more and more like Christ. At the Sunday gathering, in our growth groups, and our one-to-one, all of it's pulling in the same direction, helping us become more like Jesus, helping us live these lives of devotion to Him. So that's one thing that is the same no matter what dimension that we're operating out of. The second thing is that community is part of it. It's built in. So whether that's on Sunday or in our growth groups or one-to-one, the reason it works is because each member is doing its part. We're helping each other grow and become like Jesus.
And okay, let's also, I love, Francis Chan said this, I think in his Letters to the Church book that I loved. And it was one of the reasons he stepped away from his megachurch. He realized that the way that thing was designed was that the more he practiced and excelled in his giftings, the less other people needed to step up and grow in their giftings, because it could all be around his teaching every Sunday morning. And so you think about on a Sunday morning, how many people are actually using their spiritual gifts, and how many are actually speaking the truth in love and having to step into that? It's really very few. It's me in our church, or whoever the preacher is. It's the worship folk, some hospitality folk maybe, but really from a speaking the truth in love ceremony, it's very few. So then you have, if we're all called to be doing that, then Sunday morning, if that's all your church experience is on Sunday morning, you will never develop those muscles of how to do that, because you've never had to do it. You've never had to speak truth in love to somebody. You just listen to truth in love. Right. And so you become very underdeveloped. And I think that's a great way to describe as a church world, that we have a lot of underdeveloped Christians that have no clue how to speak to one another in love and truth.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I come from a parachurch background. You have gone through seminary, you've been a lead pastor in multiple places. So you're very familiar with the traditional church. And I thank God for bringing us together, because we're really working together, both in how God has gifted us, but also in our background and our histories. And one way that we've talked about this before is that you are very skilled at leading sort of from the Sunday gathering down. And my background and my inclination is to lead from the one-to-one up. But I've grown in my appreciation, again, like having this idea of fullness. We want to be, sometimes we can pit these things against each other. Like, well, the church, we just need to go out there and make disciples one-to-one. Yeah. Everyone needs to be making disciples. And that's true. We do want everyone to grow to maturity. And one sign of that is that they're able to pass on their faith. But it's not going to happen outside of the church. We need all three of these dimensions to be present if we're going to represent the fullness of the church, and if we're going to function as the fullness of church. But if we only have that first dimension, which a lot of churches, it's kind of a 2D expression of church, then you're right. There really isn't even the opportunity. There's certainly not the intentional structure that would encourage individual believers. Hey, we need you. If this growth group is going to work, we need everyone participating. If one-on-one is going to work, you're going to have to participate. You're going to have to share.
And it's going to stretch you, and that's good. That's what you need.
That's good. Yes,
that is literally what you need. You think without movement, without exercise, I will not grow muscles.
Right.
Like if I don't use my arm, it will die on the side of me. Right. It'll atrophy.
It'll atrophy. Yes.
And I just think that's a powerful imagery.
Right.
Of where the church has been, is that we've got to shift over this image. And I love Sunday morning. It's my favorite day of the week. Since I was a kid, I love it. There are other gifts that people practice on Sunday morning that I think is beautiful in terms of making room for each other, loving on one another, the multi-generational level. That was one of the most formative things for me in my church growing up. And there was disciple making things happening that I don't think folks realized it was disciple making. It was just more organic. And but it was that folks loved me, and I was known. And I wanted that for my kids. I want that for other people's kids. And I think that Sunday morning, and I want it for everyone, that you're able just to be a part of this beautiful, multi-ethnic, multi-generational body, and the way the enjoyment of the Lord that comes out of that is just beautiful. That I would miss that so much if all I had was one-to-one discipleship. Yeah. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. Like Sunday morning is beautiful, and it's needed as part of this model. But there's things missing on Sunday morning that you've got to have on the one-to-one. So let's kind of break down the strengths of all of these.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I know some of our folks from Paseo are watching this, so I hope it gives them an idea of how this is all fitting together, because I'm sure you'll recognize some of these pieces as we go. But if we think about the Sunday gathering, let's just sort of off the cuff, what are some of the strengths? I mean, one of the strengths of the Sunday gathering is unity. It's a unifying event. Everyone is coming together who's part of this church, and it's sort of, we're gathering as a tribe. And there's a lot of encouragement that comes from just knowing that you're part of something bigger that God is doing around the city. And yes, you're part of a growth group. Yes, you have folks that you're meeting with and discipling, but you're connected to this larger body, this larger family of believers.
I love that. To beat a metaphor to death here, to go back to the fitness metaphor of fitness experts, you can't tell by the way I look, but I love fitness stuff. And one of the things I grew up with was very isolated weightlifting, where you're only focused on certain body parts, right? And you isolate that only body part, and you lift heavy, just your chest, and then your triceps, and then your back. And the funny thing is that that's no movement we have in real life is an isolated movement. It's all a whole body movement. And so within the fitness world, and there'll be those that can correct me tremendously, but in the last couple decades, one of the big movements has changes within the weightlifting world has been, hey, we need functional movements, and things like squats or deadlifts or something that engage your entire body to do this they'll make you far healthier as a human, because all your muscles have to work in conjunction together. And there's this, to go back to the unity of the church, when the whole body is there together and we are doing something together. So for us, we are learning all together in Matthew. We're all hearing the same thing. We're all striving towards the same truth together. We're all worshiping together. It's a whole body movement. There are missional things that we can do together and talk about that would be missed if it were just a splintering away and isolated body parts all around. This is a much healthier thing that needs to happen. Now, that being said, there still needs to be strengthening of the individual parts, but these whole body movements. So I think unity is high on the list. I think it is there. I think worship is a gigantic strength of Sunday morning, because not everybody's gifted to be able, or talented enough to be able to do that. And there is something about sitting, and particularly one of my favorite things about the way that our church is, the physical room where our church gets to worship is built, is the stage is very low, and so it's not high and separated, and it's ours is like a half moon around, right? And so no matter where you sit in that worship center, you hear other people singing and worshiping, and I just find it every week. I find it so encouraging down to my core to hear the saints just worship and sing and give glory to God together. I think it's a huge thing. And so any other? I mean, there's several other strengths I could hit on.
Yeah. So there's one more that I would touch on, and I think that's unity, which we're sort of overlapping on some of these. So I think the first one we would say is encouragement. There's something about being together with the full body of Christ that is just encouraging to our spirits. Worship, I agree, is another one that's a strength for Sunday gathering, where we together focus all of our attention, collective attention, on Jesus, and worshiping him, praising him, declaring his worth and his glory. And the third, I would say, is unity. That's because, and part of that is we all hear the same message. So we're all sitting under the same teaching, and it's an opportunity for a clear bugle call. So we, at this level, let me just give three things, and we'll do this for each level, for each dimension. So the content is common. We're all learning from Matthew together. And that's unifying, both in terms of what we're learning, but also in terms of doctrine and theology. There's a safety mechanism there that's happening on Sunday. The second point that I would have is that the opportunity is to see and be seen. So hang on to that word, that it's a place for me to see my fellow believers, and it's a chance for them to see me and just connect. The relationships tend to be casual. Because you're seeing each other for an hour and a half maybe, and of that you're sitting a lot of it. So you might get a chance to interact with 4 or 5 people. Maybe if you're really outgoing, maybe you talk to 10 people. But if all we had was that dimension, if all we had was our Sunday gathering, then the relationships are going to stay casual. If we don't see each other outside of Sunday, it's a casual relationship. So let's kind of talk about that second dimension, which in our church, we refer to these as growth groups. And these tend to be gatherings of members of our church that range anywhere from 12 to 20 folks. And I'll just run through 3 here and then get your thoughts. So in terms of what gets communicated, it's an opportunity for clarity of content. So we're breaking down a passage or a topic or right now we're studying on the scripture practice. We're trying to really understand and implement this practice with clarity. The opportunity is to hear and to be heard. So now, like what you were saying on Sunday, it's not an opportunity. Most of us are not going to have an opportunity to be heard. We're going to be listening. But in our growth group, in that smaller setting, there's a chance to share and be heard, but also to hear and learn from your fellow believers. And then the relationships tend to be close. Like you can actually really grow close to a group of 12 to 20 people. So we're already kind of seeing some of the values of having multiple dimensions of how we're living out our life as the church.
Yeah, and to go back and use your language of seen and be seen, that becomes a lot deeper in a smaller group like that. I was just in the hospital today with one of our church folk who went to growth group on Thursday. That night, he thought he ate something bad at growth group because his stomach was just killing him. Woke up in the morning, it's like he had to go to emergency room. Like it's bad, and it turns out he had pancreatitis. It was not. So he's now admitted in the hospital. It wasn't the cooking of the growth group, but I was encouraged as I got there because now you have a mom and she's got 2 little ones at home, and she's at the hospital worried about him and where are meals coming. And I asked them, like, are you guys doing okay? And they're like, yeah, like our growth group has been providing food. What I love about that is I knew nothing about any of that until Sunday at gathering. I saw her, asked where the husband was. She told me about this. I'm like, wow, I didn't have to organize people to care for them. Like the growth group was just there. They're seeing, they're loving, they're like, nobody needed to tell them to do this. They just jumped in on it. And when you are a part of a growth group like that, and it is a loving environment. And then I asked her, hey, who has your kids? Well, one of the growth group members is at their house watching the kids so she could be up at the hospital to take care of them. I just love that. Like you can't, on a big level, you don't have that level of community on the first dimension. That's a second dimension.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're trying to communicate is we can have this idea that, well, there's church, and then if we want church plus, or if we want to be really committed and we've got the time, then we'll also get involved in a growth group. But really, there's dimensions of your life as a believer in a church you're just not going to get if you're not part of this second dimension. There's going to be relationships that don't get developed.
Yeah, and you know what? One thing I hear from people is they'll say things like, I just want to serve. I just want to serve. I want to get out there and help people. And what they're waiting for is for us to have some big, outreach type of thing or a ministry that they can serve in. We're going to go to, and we do those things as a church. That is great. But if you are waiting only on that, you are missing out a gigantic part of where serving actually happens. Right. It happens in these growth groups as you're just serving one another, as you're blessing one another. And at any given moment in lives of 20 folk, there are a variety of needs. You think about your group this year, there's been moving, there's been cooking for each other, there's been goodbyes, there's been packing up, there's so much happening. There's been health issues. And all of those are opportunities for the church in that growth group to practice spiritual gifts and to be formed into Christ likeness as they are loving like Christ loves, right? And so it's all part of the formational processes. That's all on top of the content of what we're studying within growth group and clarity there. So it's a both and. There's things that are happening on that level that are just powerful and beautiful.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I love that point. I think how I would say that is that the ministry opportunities are going to present themselves if you're living in community in these different dimensions of church. You will have plenty of opportunities to serve and to be ministered to have others step in and help you in your areas of need.
And we just have to shift that over. That's what it means to serve.
Yes.
Like it doesn't have to be under this big ministry umbrella organized by the church. Like, and if anything, this might be even more beautiful because it's just organic and you responding.
That's right. That's right. And this gets into that lifestyle. Well, the third dimension is the one-to-one. Yeah. And here the content is customized. So with the folks that I'm meeting with, we're trying to address very specific things as we go through, just like Paul was talking about with Timothy. These different things that he was passing on to Timothy were customized to pass on his faith. The opportunity is to know and be known. So we talk about see and be seen, hear and be heard, know and be known. There are things about me that if we spend enough time together, they're going to come out, and they're never going to come out on Sunday, and they're never going to come out in a growth group. Yeah. So there's certain aspects of our lives that we're only going to share with a select few, and the relationship is and needs to be confidential. So that kind of gets to that point of being transparent and completely open with someone. We need that, and one-on-one really presents the opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think this is the level that a lot of people get scared of. Right?
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah,
either A, they're scared of that vulnerability, they don't want to let anybody in, and so
right.
so you can keep up a front,
yes,
if you choose to.
Yep,
and there won't be any formation that happens there.
Right,
and frankly, as I have met with folks, and sometimes to be honest, I find discipleship one-on-one can be very challenging. Because as the pastor, for whatever reason, often I find young men want to just be performative around me instead of just being real. Yep. Right. And so this is where if our folks, if I can help equip others, they're going to be much more accepted and comfortable for somebody to, and that performative flair will come off. They're not trying to impress the person in the pew beside them. And I wish that wasn't the case, but I have found that to be the reality over and over. And I can always feel it. I can feel it when somebody is performing and they're not letting me in.
Yeah. And that's an encouragement. I would offer that as an encouragement to younger believers, or maybe you've been walking with the Lord for a while, but beginning to pass that on in a one-to-one way is a new thing for you. There are things that you can do that a pastor can't do. Like there are places where you can go with someone because of what you're describing there, that a leader in the church can't get to those spots. And so we need each other, and we need, like Ephesians, going back to Ephesians 4, as each part does its work, the body is going to grow. There's contributions there.
And that's not always true. I meet with a guy weekly, and it has been a beautiful growth for him. Got to baptize him last year. He feels comfortable to be himself around me, and life kind of forced that to be. Like I got to see him at his worst, right? And so here we are. And so, but right. We meet weekly, and I love what you said, that it's customized. Like we've read a book together, we've talked some of those chapters, but that kind of came up as just chatting with him, and he had some questions. But it's been more of like, and I like your disciple making definition. How do I help this guy become more devoted to following Jesus? How do I help him? So as I'm talking to him about relationships, I'm just hearing some things in there. Hey, the Jesus way of doing that would be different. Let's chat about that. Like, and what does that look like? And asking him questions. And man, every week he called, hey, can we get together? Like he loves it, and I love it. And so I like that you said it's customized, because like if I were to meet, and there are some other folks I meet with, it looks nothing like that. We're talking about total different things than what he and I are talking about. So I like that language of customized on this level. But the ultimate aim here is that I want to help him live a more devoted life to Christ. And frankly, by him showing up and being honest, it causes me to want to live a life more devoted to Christ as well, because I just want to be legit and real with him as that goes. So,
yeah, we'll have some links in the show description or in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast, where you can actually look at some of these dimensions and these different dynamics of, common content, clear content, customized content. We've got some visuals that will help you sort of put it all together.
Do you know what I think is the biggest issue here? And we can kind of start wrapping up here, because I think the biggest issue, frankly, is the church has to buy into this vision.
Yeah.
Like it's not gonna, like, and the only way that happens is if we just continue to communicate it over and over and over and over again. We are a disciple-making community where we are helping each other become devoted followers of Christ. This is what we are doing over and over and over. And then we, as we structure the church, not everybody here that's listening has the ability as a pastor to think about how the church is structured. I do, as a pastor, get to think about how we do things, how I even approach Sunday morning. Is this about formation or is it about entertainment? Is this about formation or does it have some other cause? Or how do I bring in formation into this? And even how we approach some of our big fellowships, like a big picnic or something, it still needs to be about formation. So how I communicate it to our people matters, in thinking about that. If you're a lay person, I hate that language. If you're not a pastor and you're in the church, you can still help your church regularly carry this vision together. And I think that matters because it's one of those, have you driven an electric car?
I actually have never driven an electric car.
One of the biggest changes in an electric car, this is weird, like when you let off the gas, you're going to coast a ways in a gas-powered car. Mm-hmm. An electric car, you don't. If you don't have the accelerator on, it stops almost immediately. And you can change settings to where you can coast a little bit, but it is weird. It's one of the biggest. The first time I drove a Tesla, I'm like, what is happening? There is no coasting that happens. Yeah. And I think that's true when it comes to vision of disciple making. Right. Is if the moment that we stop talking about it, there's no gradual. My experience has been like it just stops. Right. And I think the enemy would love that. He would love for the church to be entertainment centered, or whatever the opposite of disciple making is, just gathering people, or to be a formative community. As I talked about, for those second and third dimensions, they take so much effort that you've got to make time in your week. Yeah. You got to think about it. Yeah. We have to communicate this vision over and over.
I agree. I think you're right. I agree that it does take so much effort. However, it's a lifestyle. Yeah. So the flip side of that is, well, if it's a lifestyle, we don't necessarily even think of it as effort. Like for me, brushing my teeth I don't think of it as effort. It does take effort, but it's just become part of my lifestyle. This is something that's important to me. I don't even really think about it now. In the same way, following Jesus, living lives of devotion to him, becoming more like him, if that really does become our lifestyle, then yes, effort will be involved. But I often tell people, you're going to do something all day, every day. Yeah. It's just, is that being shaped more and more by your connection with Jesus and being part of his church? Or is church just something that gets attached to the rest of your life? But I do agree. I do think that's part of what radical transformation looks like, is that our whole lives do look different. Like our schedules look different. The way that we spend our money looks different. The activities that we give ourselves to. Yeah. So let me say a few things here just as we kind of wrap up, because I think they're definitely worth highlighting. First of all, I would encourage folks just to think through, what is your experience of church like right now as you think through those three dimensions? Can you see where you're living out your life with your church in those three different ways that you've Sunday gathering will probably be very obvious, but do you have a smaller group of believers that you're meeting with regularly, ideally weekly, where you're helping each other, 12 to 20 folks? That'll be a second separate time of connecting intentionally. And then everyone should be in a one-to-one relationship. Either if you're young in the faith and you haven't experienced that kind of mentoring and discipling, then are you in a relationship where someone is pouring into you? If you have been walking with the Lord for a while, are you sharing that? Are you paying that forward? And this is true even for the pastor. I think every pastor should be experiencing the church. So in that sense, we're all in the same boat. All of us need to be experiencing the life of the church in these three dimensions if we're going to fully express and fully function. The last thing that I want to say before we wrap up is that, and you touched on this, but just to sort of make it explicit, Very few of us are going to be called and gifted to lead or to minister at that Sunday gathering level. So if you're a pastor, if you're a gifted communicator in a public setting, or if you're a gifted musician, maybe you get the opportunity to do that. But more of us are going to be called and have the gifting needed to host and lead a group of 12 to 20 folks. A lot of us can do that. And then virtually all of us are called and gifted to lead someone one-to-one. If you grow to maturity, you can pass on your faith one person to one person. I mean, the only way that could not happen is if there were other development issues in play in terms of just your mental ability or your mental health. Those could be reasons, but otherwise, if you're a regularly functioning believer, you are called and you have the gifts needed. What you might still require is the training and the maturity to pass on your faith, but all of us can function.
But what you're not doing on that one-to-one is answering all of their questions.
No, not at all.
You're just helping them to live a more devoted life to Christ.
Yeah.
And if they're part of the larger church, there will be we also, maybe on that second dimension, offer classes where theology is being taught. There are things within the larger function of that funnel. And on Sunday morning, where we're constantly teaching scripture and we're walking through, and we have equipped sessions where we're teaching. So on the one-on-one, you're not having to break down deep theology at that level. You're really getting into, hey, what does it look like to live a devoted life?
And we've got some resources here at Into the Harvest. If it's something that you want to move forward, because once you have that vision and that direction, the next questions can be, well, what do I do? Where do I start? We have a resource called the Pathway Series. It's a framework of 3 books that you can pick up on Amazon or at our website, which will give you some structure to begin either using that with a growth group, a group of 10 to 20 folks, or you can use that one-on-one. We also have a new resource called Discipleship 101. It's a set of 8 videos with discussion guides. You could take someone through that. So the real challenge is just to pick something that gives you structure and then begin to initiate and share your faith in that way.
And let me give this encouragement real quick, from a pastor's standpoint. I'm assuming if you're watching this, you're a believer and you have a church gathering. It doesn't matter if your church is phenomenal at discipleship, which if you are, I would love to learn from you. Let us know what your church is doing. I think that'd be great. Because we're honestly trying to work more and more on this one-to-one level. We don't have this figured out, but we were moving towards it. But what I want to say is be the discipleship person in your church. What I mean by that, talk about it constantly. Be there. Ask your pastors about it. Ask it. Hey, what does disciple making look like? How are we making disciples? Keep it there. Keep it at the forefront, and carry that vision for your church of what does it look like for all of us to be equipped and moving together and working together in that way, as opposed to this stage-driven, a few work, we all listen. So we use the language of consumer versus participant. What does it look like to be a participant church where we're all participating, and carry that vision? Oftentimes we hear the saying that teamwork makes the dream work. But I often say the reverse is true as a communicator, that dream work makes the team work. There has to be a common dream and somebody has to be pushing it constantly that everybody can begin to find their place into it. If not, people drift. And so if you're in a community and you have bought in that you're listening to this because you want to be a disciple maker, you want to become better at it. Part of that is help the church move towards the biblical vision of what it means to be the church by, hey, we're all doing discipleship. This is what we're called to be. Don't wait for the pastor to champion it. Don't wait for the next program. Like, bring it in immediately and say, hey, what are we doing? And constantly, and be a part of that.
Yeah. I love it, man. Well, this is sort of a 30,000 view of part of how we're trying to live as the church here in California. Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode next year because
see how we are. Yeah.
Yeah, we're building this as we go.
And some of the things we're talking about, we're looking at changes on that second dimension on growth group changes. What are some things that we can do differently? Maybe, and we have some ideas there that we're excited about. We've tried some things. We're going to look at doing some new things. We're bringing in more on the one-to-one thing, and so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, so we're working on this as practitioners and learners ourselves. I do believe in the framework and the direction, and we're already seeing how God is blessing and using that.
Yes.
But I wouldn't say we're experts. We're on the journey with you guys, but hopefully some of what we talked about today is helpful for you. And if so, would love for you guys to subscribe, like the video, use the resources, and let us know what would be helpful for you as you seek to live for Christ and share Him with others.